the public health policy, the doctors who are making the policy and who are actually interacting with patients mostly don't know how to think evolutionarily.
Yep.
And that is the core problem. And so just one example that we have been talking about for a long time is that most people, including most doctors, but including perhaps especially many of the intellectuals and so-called intellectuals out there, including those with medical and scientific training, actually make claims like, why does it matter where SARS-CoV-2 came from? Like, what could it possibly matter? It's irrelevant to how we respond to it, right? Like, we were hearing this back in 2020, and we're continuing to hear it now. It's ridiculous. And I went back, and I think that the first time, but it may not have been the first time, that we specifically talked about this, we've talked about it over and over and over again. Why does the origin of the virus matter in terms of how the virus will then act in humans, continue to evolve, and therefore should be used to inform how we actually act at a public health level? On July 14th, 2020, on DarkHorse Livestream number 30, at timestamp 30 minutes and 39 seconds, and I'll put this into the show notes, you start discussing why and how a lab origin may explain why the virus acts the way it does with regard to effects on children and transmission outdoors and other things. So that's in July of 2020, and I'm not sure that was the first time you were talking about it or we were talking about it, but I know that at least it happened then.
Goes back at least that far.
At least then, and we've been talking about it ever since, and using an evolutionary understanding of, okay, if not zoonotic, because from almost the very beginning, the evidence has pointed not zoonotic, but lab origin. What else can we say about what is going to happen next? That is part of what we have been doing. That is part of the model that we have been using, which, guess what, was available to anyone who wanted it. And this is part of why I agree with you. This doesn't look like an error because, it doesn't cost money. It takes some practice and it takes some patience and it takes being willing to be wrong and to rethink, when you arrive at some place that is wrong and go back to the last place on which you are certain that you're on firm intellectual ground and go, okay, well, let's take the other branch then. Like, you have to be doing that all the time. And most people feel like, it's not what I do. I don't have time. It makes me look weak, something. But we need it. Like, we need all the people who are making decisions on behalf of any of the rest of us to absolutely 100% be willing to have exactly what the author of this piece calls epistemic humility, but like actual epistemic humility, not the kind that he is asking for, the kind that he needs to, and that all of these people need, and that we have, like that we need, and you need to constantly check in with yourself, be like, how, am I wrong? How would I know? Who can I ask? What can I check with in terms of, how many of the views that I hold are inconsistent, and do it all the time. That's the thing. It doesn't end. You don't get to do this and then be like, okay, I graduated. I'm done thinking for myself now.
Now I'm an expert.
Now I'm an expert. And what I believed on that day of graduation is always true. Shall always be true. Nothing ever shall change because my degree says so. Like, that's not how the world works.
No,
right?
and if I might, this epistemic humility thing is going to become very important.
Yeah.
And I'm concerned that this abuse of it, it's like evidence-based medicine. Like, who wouldn't be in favor of evidence-based medicine until you dig and you discover that evidence-based medicine doesn't mean evidence-based medicine, right?
Right.
So anyway, the point is epistemic humility involves building a circuit in which you are very sensitive to evidence that you have something important wrong, and you are highly motivated to chase it down so that as quickly as possible you can fix the error and stop being wrong.
Exactly.
Right? And so does that process end? Absolutely not, right? What you do is you get closer and closer to right, which means you get closer and closer to a model that is more and more predictive while assuming less. That's the whole point of the exercise. Mm-hmm. And anybody who thinks that they've got this wired and now they need to tell doctors to sit down, right, is not displaying epistemic humility. They're displaying the opposite. They're displaying a kind of arrogance, which they would like to, of course, cloak in the idea of humility because it's very attractive to do that, but it's not right. It is, you are putting us in danger for the next one.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm reminded, this is a theme, this is a drumbeat of ours, but this piece that I wrote, what if we're wrong? It was first published in Aereo, and then I republished it on my Substack. Specifically, goes after the certainty that so many people seem to have, and ironically, it is our supposed certainty that people attack us for. And it is their certainty of things that we've said that we never said that is the basis for a lot of these, crazy beliefs and accusations, and frankly, at different levels and different places, policies that are being implemented. So, why are doctors? It's one thing to say, okay, most people don't understand how to think evolutionarily. It's not necessarily widespread in high school or college curricula. Even if you're a biology major, maybe you had a course, maybe, right? So still, though, it seems like doctors, if we're right, and if Nessie and Williams are right in why we get sick, and everything about us is the product and products of evolution, obviously doctors should be trained in, practiced in, skilled in understanding how to think evolutionarily. So I did a little search on medical school curricula in the US, and I just pulled up 5. First I Googled, and the first one that came up was Drexel University's College of Medicine, and then I went, you know what, I'm going to actually just pick 4 more, not randomly, but out of my head. So I went and looked at Stanford, University of Florida in Gainesville, Harvard, Drexel, and the University of Washington, here in Washington State in Seattle, and searched, and I don't have clear visuals, so I'm just going to walk us through this. I basically looked for the curriculum that is required for all medical students, and to the degree that it was available, tried to search on all of the courses offered, but specifically searched on not just the names of courses, but the course descriptions for all of, when it was available, first, second, third, fourth year coursework and all the required coursework. And I searched on the word evolution. And then I also searched on just Evo, because evolutionary, right, could show up. At Stanford, there are many different pathways possible. Every med student takes the same courses the first year. They do have a social justice and health equity curriculum, which is prominently displayed. But the word evolution, even the root Evo, shows up 0 times at Stanford. University of Florida College of Medicine, the required courses. Year 1, no evolution. Year 2, no evolution. Year 3 and 4, nope, none, never. Okay. Harvard Medical School core courses, no mention. And again, I'm not just looking at titles of courses. I'm looking at course descriptions. I'm searching on course descriptions here. Nothing. The Drexel College of Medicine, nope. How about the University of Washington School of Medicine? No. They make it a little bit harder to assess because they've got all these different pathways, but no. None of the pages I landed on could I find a single. There was one page on one of these sites where Evo showed up, but it was within the word developing, so that doesn't count.
Right.
Right. So literally 5, and this is some of the top medical schools in the country and some that aren't. 5 medical schools in the U.S. right now, with regard to their required, and to some degree, as much as I was able to find it, they're not required, but if you're interested in this, that, or the other, curriculum, make no mention of evolution anywhere in the coursework. And that's not to say, of course, that some of these classes, once you're in it, might occasionally reference evolution. I assume that they do, but it's that referencing, which is to say, of course, we all know that. And therefore, we all understand that we are evolved. But frankly, most people who think they believe in evolution don't have any idea what they're doing. They don't know how it works. They don't know how to think evolutionarily. And it's how you get to people imagining that clinical work was going on here with COVID. It wasn't. This was not in any way informed by what we actually are as evolved human beings this whole 3 years. None of it.
It flew in the face.
Yes.
And that is in some sense the story of what we did, is we just constantly checked reality against an evolutionary model, and what was being advised never made any sense, which alarmed us to a greater and greater degree.
Yes.
I did want to point out, it may or may not be easy for you to find, but that sentence that you said was a cryptic reference to adaptive landscapes.
Oh, yeah.
It's relevant here if you can find it.
I think I can. This was in page 236. Here we go.
It's like the last sentence in what you're, or almost.
No, it's the previous paragraph, but if the organism, it's 2. If the organism had been designed with the possibility of fresh starts and major changes, there would be better ways of preventing many diseases. Alas, every successive generation of the human body must function well, with no chance to go back and start afresh.
Perfect.
Is that it?
Yeah. Now, here's the reason I want to resurrect that. Again, as with the Thomas Sowell quote that happens to apply to biology, or vice versa, the quote you've just read there is a reference to what you and I would technically call historical contingency, and an engineer might call path dependence. Okay? Now, I want to point out that and by the way, it's not just that 5 medical schools make no mention of it. It's 5 of 5 that you looked at.
Exactly. Like I could have kept going.
You could have kept going. And what I'd be interested
my prediction, like I would love to have anyone who says, actually this medical school
is the exception.
Yeah,
It would be great to know if it
I'd love to
exists.
know, yeah.
I've been saying for I don't know how long, decades, that that medicine is still taught as if Darwin had never published.
You have, yes, exactly.
And so anyway, why is that? Now, I want to give them their due. I want to explain where that initially came from, because it did have a good reason at first. And then it no longer has a good reason, and we are now paying a tremendous price, the non-evolutionary nature of medicine.
Okay.
The problem is you discover a powerful principle like natural selection. 1859, Darwin finally publishes what he's been working on. The world is suddenly aware of something. It can be sort of summed up in a paragraph, but it's really not clear what it implies about medicine. If you were to say, aha, suddenly we know what we are, surely that impacts medicine. Let's go back and revise the curriculum, 3 weeks after Darwin published. You would be more likely to do harm than good, right? Because there wasn't enough understanding of what the implications, what Darwin had said was too crude.
You don't add the new stuff to the core curriculum right away.
Right. So my point is, initially, there is a reason for doctors not to jump at evolution, even though in a philosophical sense, it was obvious that it would ultimately have tremendous implications, and that, frankly, medicine should start with selection, right? Every medical curriculum on Earth should start with this, because it is riddled throughout it, whether you mention it or not, whether you understand it or not, right? Clonal selection, the way in which a vaccine induces immunity, is a sped up version of literal genetic evolution inside the body, right? If you don't understand the nuances of how selection works, then you're not going to understand clonal selection, and you're going to just see vaccination as a kind of a black box that induces something important that fends off disease, and you're going to screw up when they try to feed you something that doesn't work this way, or doesn't properly work this way, or they have to use an adjuvant because what they gave you isn't good enough to induce the response, or any of these things. So anyway, at first, there is a reason for doctors not to jump at Darwinism. But then it becomes a territorial question, and they get used to not thinking evolutionarily, even as evolutionary thinking catches up and then overtakes medicine with its capacity to say something about what is likely to do more harm than good, right? So we are still dealing with a several thousand-year-old oath to do no harm, but the principle that would allow you to see where harm is before you do it is not invoked in any core way in medical curricula, which is frightening at this point, right? That historical contingency is resulting in us not going back and saying, well, it's 2023. Maybe it's time to rewrite the medical curriculum in light of all of the things that we have now learned about the way evolution works, right? It wasn't ready in 1859. In 2023, it's long overdue. And it's not like the field of evolutionary medicine hasn't progressed since the publishing of that book. But what has been done is it's been segregated. The point is, it is treated as non-medical. The same way evolutionary psychology is treated outside of the clinical practice, right? The point is, it's an abstraction. Oh, it's very nice that we can think in a Darwinian way about medicine. No, it's not very nice. It's fundamentally important when you go into your doctor's office. In fact,
it's not an add-on.
It's not an add-on. And I believe that book has a terrible piece of advice from Richard Dawkins on the back. Does it say something about...
buy 2 copies and give one to your doctor?
Buy 2 copies and give one to your doctor. I know this is terrible advice because I did it. You can imagine how that went over.
Well, okay. I don't know what to ask.
Well, I mean, basically, the point is it is taken as an affront. It is taken as a challenge to somebody's expertise rather than a, hey, you and I are in parallel fields. I'm not in no position to to tell you about medicine, but I am in a position to tell you about something that I know isn't included in that medicine, and this might change your thinking, right? So anyway,
Your doctor wasn't appreciative.
no, my doctor was not appreciative, which I get, right? But nonetheless, my doctor, well, I don't know if my doctor went on to read it or not, but my doctor, assuming that his initial reaction was indicative,
Did he
missed
throw
an
it at your head?
opportunity. He didn't throw it. He just looked at me like I had walked in from Mars. But in any case, path dependence, that is a feature of a model of developing systems. Medicine is a developing system. The human body is a developing system. It's not surprising that path dependence ends up a relevant piece of the toolkit for understanding both things. And medicine is in the process of screwing up by not being evolutionary, which is a big part of, as you point out, why you and I, with no budget, sitting here just hashing stuff out in front of a camera, were able to beat all of these experts because we have a model that was actually relevant across the pandemic. Evolution is relevant across the pandemic. It's relevant to the evolution of the pathogen. It is relevant to the evolution of the immune response. It is relevant to the human body and the damage that is done to it by both pathogens and by badly formulated pharmaceuticals. The point is, it's not just another field. It is a baseline toolkit that works for any of these complex systems that have this adaptive feature at their core. And it should be updating medicine, which it is not doing.
It's really, really not.